Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And on this week's episode, we've got our old pal Jim Naremore here to talk to us about 2001: A Space Odyssey. Thanks for coming back, Jim.
Oh, glad to come back.
Yeah. Jim, you literally wrote the book on Kubrick.
Well, I wrote a book on Kubrick. There are a lot of books on Kubrick.
But it's titled On Kubrick.
Yeah.
So you get that, you get to have that. So you're going to talk to us about that film, and you did the intro for the film when it was at the cinema a week or so ago. So I thought, Jason, we've talked about this film so much. It's time we brought in someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
I thought you didn't like
this film.
this film.
Well, that's what we're here to talk about.
So you talk about it all. Sorry, I've missed your
See, that's the point. That's the point. I cannot stop watching and talking about this film, even though when I watch it, I'm like, I don't like this movie. So we'll talk about how my feelings changed or didn't change the last time I saw it, and we'll have Jim here to tell us more about it. So let's talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey. So let me explain where I'm coming from this one, Jim. By the way, have you seen the documentary Room 237?
No, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Have you seen it?
Yeah, we saw it at Chicago, and I liked it a lot. I don't know if you came around to it or not.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like an interesting anthropological movie about fans of that.
Yeah,
that's how I took it.
That's what it is.
I like the movies. I don't like the fans of the movie featured in the movie. Yeah, I think that's what it is for me.
But anyways, one of the characters, one of the people talking about the film, and the Room 237 is about The Shining, not about 2001. But they basically said, I don't like this movie, but I keep watching it. That's how I feel about 2001.
They mention when it's on TV, they can't stop watching it.
Yeah.
And then they don't like the movie.
Yeah. So I've seen this movie at least 6 times. I saw it once when I was a kid. I saw it once when I was in high school. I saw it once when I was about 20. And then I've seen it 3 times in the last 2 years.
Did you ever see it with a controlled substance?
No, I'm not. That's not my thing. But
John Lennon saw it about 50 times that way.
Really? Yeah. So my complaints have, the first few times I watched, I didn't really think about it. I just sort of watched it. More recently, I've been sort of trying to watch it in a more critical sense of what is it about this film. So my complaints have always been thus. There's nothing resembling a story until about half an hour into the film.
It's only about 30 minutes when characters are in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And they're pretty flat characters, right?
Yeah.
In fact, they're Tweedledum and Tweedledee.
Yeah. The other thing that bothers me about the film, I think it spends way too much time, and this I still feel like is, and this is coming off, I just saw this at the cinema on the big screen for the first time.
Because you promised.
A couple weeks ago, exactly. I always felt like the film spent too much time sort of patting itself on the back, like we really thought about how this technology will really work. I still feel like that's true. I'm less so on the first complaint. I feel like on the big screen, all of that sort of grandeur, the origin of man thing section of the film is actually much more interesting. And then I never really liked the last part of it where it was, sort of when it turns into an experimental film, essentially. I liked that better on the big screen as well. That the sort of light show part of it made a little bit more sense, at least in the context of what had been happening. So Jason and I have talked about this film at least 3 times now on the show. And spent a lot of time talking about it. So maybe you can give us your perspective on the film, Jim.
Well, let me say, first of all, that 2001 is not my favorite Kubrick movie.
Yeah.
So if you want somebody to completely defend the film,
I don't need you to defend it. I just want to talk about it more.
But my complaints about it would be would have to do with the opening sequence, the Dawn of Man thing. Those are the best gorilla suits I've ever seen in a movie, but they're still gorilla suits.
Yeah.
And in striving for extraordinary realism, I'm still aware of the trick that's going on there. It'd be interesting to think about now that we have digital effects. With Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Andy Serkis has this incredible performance as an ape in it. It too looks artificial, but it doesn't disturb the suspension of disbelief in any way. I don't know how to explain why that happens.
Feel like
maybe because it's more humanoid or more expressive or something
I think it's
like
because of the expressiveness, because the facial expression, and it's not supposed to be a standard ape. It's not supposed to be an animal.
Exactly,
It's supposed to be sort of this is sort of a new evolution.
Right. And the other thing that I would say, this is just me, but I agree with you about the last part of the film, the light show. I think the avant-garde had done that already and had done it better than Kubrick does. I like it when we get into the hotel room or the weird thing, but a lot of the light show, what was called the slit scan that Douglas Trumbull devised, and it's okay, but it never gets to me the way I think it's supposed to. What I like is the middle of the film, and I like the way the film ends. And I would, stepping back from all this, I would. I think it's a remarkable film in a lot of ways, even if I'm not as passionate about it as I am about some of Kubrick's films. So anyway, that's where I stand.
Yeah, Jason, did you?
Well, I was introduced to it as a really young child. My dad watched it frequently, and I would agree with you, Jim, that the middle of the movie is, I think, the most interesting part. I think it's the most well-executed science fiction, realistic science fiction film, not only of its time, but sort of maybe of all film time, sort of based on what we've been able to do as a society with space travel. So it's it hooked me in that sense because I've always wanted to be an astronaut. That's always something that I've aspired towards. And it really plays with it, especially at the end of the movie as well. It kind of pulls that into the end with the sort of emotional pull that they're creating at the same time. So I've always received the film in a positive light. I've never negatively really looked at it up until maybe more recently as an adult, sort of looking at it sort of in a maybe more realistic sort of point of view, rather than being like, oh, cool, space,
Yeah.
Like, oh, the computer's like trying to kill people,
Yeah.
Like that always sort of obviously as a child is once you sort of realize what they're, what's going on and you're like, I feel like an adult. This is an adult movie. So yeah, I've always appreciated the movie.
Yeah.
You could say that it's one of the greatest movie spectacles, and it's also maybe the most expensive art movie that's ever been made.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it really is an art movie in a lot of ways.
And I will totally concede this is an exceptionally important film.
Yeah, you've never not said that.
Yeah, I mean it's and again, when I first 3 years ago when I started paying attention to this movie again, I had always been under the impression that it was made in like early 80s, like maybe like 1980 or 79, something like that, like post Star Wars. But knowing now that it was made in 1968 just blows my mind because no one was doing sci-fi like this in 68.
There had been maybe one, I wouldn't even call it an A-list movie about this time, but sci-fi had pretty much fallen off. It was considered something that belonged in the B-movie realm, the monster that ate Pittsburgh or something like that. Those great Ray Harryhausen things, or the ant, them, that was the thing.
Do you think maybe that's because of the fact that we were pretty much just doing that as a nation?
Well, I think one of the things that prompts the movie, well, at least two things prompt it beyond Kubrick himself. One is it's the moment when cinema is trying to become a special event, spectacle. And the space program is underway. We're right at the height of it. It's making headlines every day. In fact, Kubrick took out some kind of insurance policy when he's working on the film in case the moon landing happened before the film got done. It was kind of a race to make sure the film got done before we actually got out there. So it was seen as a topical thing, and But yeah, going back to the thing about sci-fi movies, the only movie I can remember widescreen color, it's a very charming movie. I love it. Is Forbidden Planet from the 50s, which was trying to do something philosophical with science fiction, and it's still a quite amusing film. But no, I mean, it's interesting that now science fiction is a big movie genre for Hollywood.
Yeah.
The Western has fallen off the map, but sci-fi is still here.
But I feel like it's harder. It's still hard to do sort of the serious sci-fi movie. A lot of times nowadays, at least as a sci-fi fan, I hear this argument a lot. There's Star Trek sci-fi and there's Star Wars sci-fi. And Star Wars sci-fi is almost like an action-y sort of movie. Star Trek is like the thoughtful sort of like lots of literary references, and now that's not happening anymore. Star Trek is now sort of
and
on
Prometheus
the other side of it.
Tried to be philosophical, but
it didn't really work.
It didn't work for me. I don't know.
The literature, I've read a lot of sci-fi books from the 60s, and that seems to be where this idea that sci-fi could be a serious thing. And also, television shows like Twilight Zone, I think, also contributed, where they sort of figured out we can talk about serious stuff, and if we wrap it up in this alien story, then people won't necessarily stop us from talking about this serious stuff.
Well, I think we separate the movies from fiction for a minute. I think sci-fi fiction had by the 50s become a quite reputable literature. And is not to be sneezed at. And it isn't. You get writers like Ray Bradbury. You get Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote this. More and more very interesting, serious writers are doing this. They're not just formulaic writers. And I'm not a special science fiction fan, but there's something about this speculative fiction, about projecting the story into the future, where every single thing that happened, and this is not all the way true with 2001, but everything that happens, you say, wait a minute, a telephone would seem odd. A cigarette lighter would seem odd. I don't know. So you have this. There's a famous book about sci-fi literature by a guy named Darko Suvin. He calls it cognitive estrangement. It's like your mind shifts back in a way, and it's almost like the world becomes more real, not less real to you. You're more thoughtfully aware and engaged to it. So I think there's a real defense to be made for that, for the fundamental seriousness of sci-fi.
Yeah.
But the movie market today is not for that. And this movie almost flopped. When it was first released, 2001, MGM, the studio, they couldn't figure out what the hell it was about, and they walked out on the suits walked out on the preview for it, and in response, Kubrick cut 19 minutes from it. Anyway, 19 minutes. I don't know what those 19 minutes were, but that's it. And the initial critical response to it was not good. I think Pauline Kael called it big shot idiot solemnity or something like that. And a lot of people didn't like it. Who liked it was the kids.
Interesting.
And it became a dope movie. And it became, the word got around that it was very hip. And it seemed to plug into the counterculture in a way, in the same way that Dr. Strangelove had. So Kubrick was kind of ahead of the curve with the audience. And as time went on, it began building more and more and more, and finally became, a good investment for MGM. But it looked like for a while it wasn't going to work. In fact, it was a long time before Kubrick made any money from it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I know he wrote this, so did he also write, was this based on a previous work of his?
Yeah,
or?
The origin of this, actually I think Kubrick's desire to make a science fiction movie probably goes back to the 50s. And I don't think of Dr. Strangelove as a sci-fi movie, but it won the Hugo Award for the best science fiction film of the year. And there was a scene that Kubrick had in that movie that he didn't use. He planned at one point to have aliens visit a dead world at the end of the movie, but he didn't use that.
Yeah.
But he was interested in that idea of extraterrestrial intelligence and stuff.
Yeah.
And so he read this nine-page short story by Arthur C. Clarke that had appeared, I think, in 1951. It's called, I don't know if this was the original title, but it was known as The Sentinel.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And it was about, I think it takes place in 1996 when a spaceship from America lands on the moon, and they find this odd crystal construction that's like a giant space burglar alarm that sets off a signal into outer space. So this is the 9-page story. And so Kubrick goes to Clarke and sits down and says, I want to use that as a starting point for this film. And so they discuss what this idea will be. And this is perhaps a unique situation. Kubrick never liked conventional screenplays anyway, but he hires Clarke to write a novelization of a film before the film is even made. So I mean, he writes this novel. I think it was called Journey Beyond the Stars, and not 2001 yet. And so then Kubrick takes that. It doesn't get published. Kubrick takes that and sits down with Clarke, and they build a screenplay out of it. And it goes through lots of different revisions. So Clarke, I don't know, maybe we should say something about him. He was quite famous in that period for writing a serious science fiction novel called Childhood's End. Yeah. And Childhood's End has influences in a certain way how 2001 ends. He was also a kind of amateur astronomer and paleontologist. He was tied in really well with NASA.
Yes.
They made him privy to things going on there, and I think that's one of the reasons that Kubrick wanted to use him. Yeah. And he had written a book called Profiles of the Future, which was a kind of projecting thing. And a lot of his predictions are pretty accurate.
Yeah.
And they are what a lot of you see in the film, like the space shuttle, the space station. Even if these didn't happen, they were. Yeah. They're still plausible.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of. I mean, I think that's it. When people think of Arthur C. Clarke now, they think about a guy who was sort of a futurist who thought very critically about how would this all work.
Right.
So
temperamentally very different from Kubrick, though. I think. I think he did. Was it 2020? What was the sequel?
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
2010.
2010.
The year we made contact.
Yeah. I thought that was an awful movie.
Really?
Yeah.
I actually kind of liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I know I've seen it. I haven't.
Out of context.
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think it even.
No, it doesn't.
Even gets up above the shoelaces of 2001.
It doesn't, but I think it is an interesting sort of play on sort of the world that was created.
But that's Arthur C. Clarke without Kubrick.
Sure.
So
anyway,
yeah.
So let's talk about some of the elements of the film, because this is sort of this film is sort of like very well known for being somewhat obscure in certain aspects. Yes. So the monolith. At times in the film, it seems like it's intelligent. Other times, it seems like it's sort of passive.
Yes.
At the end of the film, it's sort of like leading the ship to another world past Jupiter. So what is the monolith?
Huh?
Is it a metaphor for something? Do you know? I mean, what can you say about the monolith?
Well, let me back off from the question, because I think one of the interesting things about about Kubrick's strategy in this movie is that when he started out with Clarke writing scripts, the first version of the screenplay didn't even have a computer in it, or it had a computer, but it didn't figure in any important way. And at the end, one of the early drafts, the astronaut gets to the Jupiter mission or whatever, and winds up in this kind of strange hotel room that seems to be based on old movies that he's seen. Okay, and a telephone rings, and he picks it up, and some extraterrestrial intelligence starts talking to him on the telephone, and then he meets them, and they are, I don't know, they have like silver bodies and kind of a funny nose and big eyes, no apparent sexual organs. And so the monolith isn't in these early versions. And not only in that respect, but in various others, as the film went along, Kubrick kept cutting away rational explanations for things, not allowing you to. The original, very close to the end of the start of the film, there was a great deal of off-screen narration explaining stuff to you. And in almost every one of Kubrick's movies, there is a narrator. And so it's characteristic of him to do this, but he cut the narrator. And when he did that, it's anybody's guess as to what's going on. Okay, goes back to your question about the monolith. I mean, all you got to go on is what you see.
Yeah.
I could say that it originates with that early short story idea of the kind of burglar alarm set by people, but it's what's also happening is that whatever it is, it's influencing evolution.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's clear, right?
That's clear.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And what Kubrick wound up with in one of the last drafts of the screenplay. I mean, I don't know if I can find the actual words. I had them marked on this sheet of paper. Anyway, what he decided was that the aliens were creatures of radiation. He says. Who have escaped the tyranny of matter, quote, end quote. Okay. So they are in the air, whatever they are.
Okay.
And the big black monolith is just a weird, spooky sign. It's kind of like Jung. It's kind of like Freud. It's kind of like the super hardest, coolest thing that was ever made by engineered by anybody or something. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's all I can say.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one more thing and I've got one more observation after that. We're getting a little close on time, so we need to wrap up a little bit. But I did sort of make a joke when I first told you about this and said, "Oh, I won't make you explain the space baby," and then you said you would. I can't believe that.
I'm not going to explain the space baby to you, but I was joking when I said I would explain it, but I can tell you where it comes from.
Okay.
And I can tell you the background of it.
All right.
But I probably don't need to do this, right? What would your guess be about the space baby?
Well, in my mind, it's all cyclical.
Yeah.
It's you start out with the dawn of man and becoming something, and then he goes on a long journey far away. Now he's coming back.
Yes, but also when the ape, is affected by that monolith, and he's looking at he's kind of playing with the bones of a carcass on the ground. He tips it. He kind of turns his head, curious about it, and then Bowman in the room, aging now. He's sitting at a table. He knocks a crystal glass off onto the floor, and he looks down at it and he goes, And the next thing we see is this fetus floating in the heaven. So one assumes that what's happening is we're at a new evolutionary stage.
Yeah.
In the background here, this goes back to Arthur C. Clarke. It has to do with a kind of and Kubrick. When Kubrick, I know we're running short of time, but when Kubrick started the movie, he was still very much, after Dr. Strangelove, preoccupied with nuclear weaponry. And this envisions a time in the future when the Earth is overpopulated and nuclear weapons have proliferated. And that shot that goes from the bone in the air to the spaceship, a narrator was supposed to tell you that spaceship was one of several nuclear weapons orbiting the Earth, that you could launch things from it. And it has if you see the film next time, the ship has a Russian thing painted on the side of it. So what was supposed to happen was that in one version of Clarke's story is this Superman is coming from back to Earth, and by the sheer power of will, looks at these atomic weapons circling the Earth and explodes them. just looks at them and they explode. Kubrick cut all that.
Okay.
He left it in, but he didn't give you any explanation of it, and he didn't give you that last scene. So he leaves you. But the idea of a couple of ideas remain constant. What's strange about the film, and this is more typical of Kubrick than of Clarke. Human progress is based on barbarism and murder at every stage. Even when you get to the point where artificial intelligence might be superior to the human intelligence, and that's one of the witty things about the movie, I think, that the humans are so bland and Hal is so interesting. And the machines even resemble humans in some way, the spaceships and stuff. Where was I going with this?
Barbarism and murder.
Oh yeah, barbarism, and so yeah, right. So, you got to remember that the main theme of the film is the music theme is Strauss's "Also Sprach Zarathustra," and that's referring to Nietzsche's, Friedrich Nietzsche's famous sort of poetic philosophical thing, "Also Sprach Zarathustra." Let me see if I can find what Nietzsche says. Just a second. This is what Nietzsche says. Man, or what Zarathustra says, man is something that is to be surpassed. What have ye done to surpass man? Once were ye apes, and yet even man is more of an ape than any of the apes. Even the wisest among you is only a disharmony and hybrid of plant and phantom. But do I bid you to become plants and phantoms? Lo, I teach you the Superman. So there is this very Nietzschean idea, I think, running through the thing, and what the baby is the Superman.
Yeah.
But whether or not that's going to get us away from murder or not, I don't know, because even the superior intelligence of the computer is murderous.
Yeah, that's the first thing he does once he learns.
Yeah, right. And so it's a rather dark. Whereas I think Arthur C. Clarke was optimistic about the future. Kubrick was pessimistic about the future of humanity anyway. And I think that carries over into his interest in AI, artificial intelligence, that movie that Spielberg wound up directing. I think Kubrick foresaw the end of humanity and maybe didn't think it was such a bad idea.
All right. I've got one last observation. The last time I saw 2001, I had not yet seen Solaris.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned that Solaris was
Certainly
thought of as
influenced.
like the Russian answer to 2001.
No, I don't think it was necessarily competition.
Someone said that. I've heard that. But anyways, it really struck me this time watching the film how much Solaris owes. Like even the structure
absolutely.
of the film is, you know, the boardroom scene where they're like before, you know, when they're talking about like this mission and what you've got to keep this secret because everyone thinks your radio's down and, you know, just how close all of that was. And it really, I was really thinking about Solaris a lot when I watched
it's interesting
this
to see
film.
those two films together. Solaris is a great movie. It seems to me Solaris is more about the inner psychology of the astronauts, whereas this film, 2001, is not about psychology, except maybe the psychology of Hal. And it's 2001 is obviously more epic and vast and spectacular.
Yeah.
Solaris is kind of claustrophobic. Yes. It's almost like a Samuel Beckett play or something like that, you know. But obviously influenced by Kubrick. Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything else?
I'm good.
All right. Well, Jim, thanks so much for coming on. You know, every time you come on, it's a lot of fun. I wish we could talk about this all day or all night, in fact.
We already have.
Yes. So let's go ahead and get out of here. Jim, again, thank you so much.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So I'm Andy.
And I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.